Hi, I'm Callum, and I'm a software developer for the Oasys LS-DYNA environment. I work across the entire Oasys suite, focusing on the user interface and the workflows, as well as working on features of Oasys Primer, D3PLOT, and T. In this webinar, I'm going to focus specifically on customization options available for users in D3PLOT and T, including some features which have been added in the upcoming version 17 of the software. In the first part of this webinar, I'm going to discuss the high-level customization options available. I'll specifically explore these within the context of D3PLOT and T, though much of this can be applied to Oasys Primer, Reporter, and Shell as well. After this, I'm going to go in-depth with a number of different data visualization options that you can use to customize your data output for your specific needs, whether they be accessibility, brand guidelines, or just to speed up your post-processing workflow. This webinar is going to cover features in both D3PLOT and T, as I've mentioned, as well as some more general features. You'll notice that some of the slides will have blue borders like this one, indicating that they cover general content, or orange or red borders indicating D3PLOT and T specific content, respectively. So we'll begin with high-level customization then. Preferences allow you to save many different customization options for future sessions. They can be accessed from the Preferences editor, which is available in Primer, D3PLOT, and T through the Options menu or through the File menu in Reporter. We'll give you an example of that now. Here you can see D3PLOT. If I go to the Options menu, which is on the toolbar up here, there's an Edit Prefs button, which brings up the Preferences editor. Now you can see it's asking me a question if I want to change the install preferences. This is due to my own admin rights on my machine, so I'm not going to go into that at the moment. Many of you probably won't see this pop up here. But if I want to change a D3PLOT preference, I'll go into the D3PLOT part of the tree here, and expand it like that. I can turn on a preference by selecting it from the tree and ticking this active tick box. And you'll see that it comes up showing true, and up here it says that the default value is true. So automatically when you turn it on, it's set to the default value. But for instance, I probably am turning this on because I want to change it from the default value. So I might want to turn it to false. This window positions preference sets the position of undocked windows. So it records where you've left them in your previous session, so that when you open a new session, it will remember where they were and open them in those same places. But for instance, if I don't want to recall that, maybe I'm working on a laptop device and I'm plugging into different monitors all the time. I don't want to have to worry about my window positions moving around all over the place. I can turn it off like this. And then to save that, I would go to File and Save. It tells me to save them there. You can see that these preferences here, these two have both been highlighted in green. That means that they're saved in my Home Preferences folder. If I go into All Programs, here are some examples of preferences highlighted in a different color. These red ones are in the Installed Preferences file. There's a series of different preferences in a hierarchy, and when you launch any program in the Oasys suite, their preferences are honored in that hierarchy. So the top of the hierarchy is Administrator Preferences, then Installation Preferences, which are these red ones here, and then your Home Preferences, which are the green ones. So as I said, preferences are saved in an OA pref file, which is by default stored in your Home folder. You can see on the screen whether you're a Windows or a Linux user, that'll be slightly different, but you'll probably know where that folder is on your machine. And an OA pref file is just a text file that is human readable. So I can give you an example of that as well. This is my home OA pref file. All of these hashes down the left-hand side show you that those are commented out. That means they won't be read by the program when reading the preferences file. They'll be ignored. And they're just there to show you what preferences are available and what valid values there are for them as well. I can jump down to this line, which should show me the D3PLOT preferences that I have set. See that these lines don't begin with a hash. And you can see the format of a preference is to start with the program name, D3PLOT, then a star, and then the preference name. So that window positions preference that I've just set is saved here, and it's set to false. To see a full list of preferences available, you can use the Preferences editor, as I just demonstrated, your OA-pref file like that, or each of the program manuals. Here are some D3PLOT preferences recommended by our Oasys support team. I'm not going to go through all of these right now, but I'll pick out a couple to talk about. The top one there, header type, will change the heading of the graphics window to show, in this case, the file name rather than the default. And the default setting for this preference is the model title. So it might be that your model is just called Model 1 and doesn't give you a lot of information, but your file name might give you better information. So this could be a useful preference to use. Also have the window layout preference there. By default, D3PLOT opens new windows one above the other in a horizontal positioning, but using Tile Tool will open them a new window to the right of existing windows, so they're laid out side by side instead. You can also set this to open each window in a new page or open multiple windows in a grid format. Here are some THIS preferences as well, recommended by our support team. Again, I'm not going to go through them all in depth, but I'll pick out a couple. So the X label size and Y label size preferences will allow you to set font size for these labels. So they are sized automatically by default, but you can define them to be set to size 14 all the time, or a different size if you wish. And you can set each of these preferences on the screen so that all your font sizes on your graph are size 14. You can also define a directory to store your JavaScript using the script directory preference at the bottom. If you need your script directory to be different from the THIS default script directory, which is in your install location on your machine. You'll be able to access these slides separately from this webinar to look through the other ones here in more depth. And as I said, detailed explanations of each preference can be found in the D3PLOT and THIS manuals. As the eagle-eyed among you probably saw in my demo just then, version 17 of the Oasys suite presents an updated graphical user interface, or GUI, with a more modern look and feel and more accessible interaction. There's lots of details about these changes on our website in a news article. And the main customizability aspect here that I'm going to talk about is the theme. By default, our software uses the light theme, but this can be changed to suit your needs. We also present a dark theme and a classic theme if you prefer. To change themes, you go to the display menu here, and there is a GUI theme drop-down. So I might want to change to the dark theme by clicking this button here. That only saves this dark theme for this session. So if I close D3PLOT and reopen it, it won't open it in the dark theme. In order to save it for future sessions, I'd have to go into this menu again and click Save Pref. And you can see it says it's updated my preferences settings. I can also do that from the Preferences editor by going in and finding Graphical User Interface and GUI Theme. I'm going to turn that back to light now. But changing the preference in here won't change it for your current session. You'd still have to use the display menu. As well as the themes, the font customization options have been expanded for version 17. These are all controlled in the Menu Attributes panel. I'm going to switch back to D3Plot again and show you. Menu Attributes is under the Options tool here. There's Menu Attributes. And here we're interested in the top part of the panel. The font options that you see here are specific to what's available on my machine. So if you're a Windows user, yours may well be similar, but if you're using Unix or Linux, you'll probably see some different options in these drop-downs here. So the menus font is the font that is used on all of the menus that you can see on the screen. By default, it's set to Helvetica, but if I wanted to change it to Times New Roman, for instance, I can just click on that here. And now all my menus have changed to use Times New Roman font. Personally, I prefer Helvetica, so I'll keep using Helvetica for the remainder of the webinar. Also, you may want to change the listing font. So that is for information and help boxes and for data boxes as well. So if I click on the help box here, you can see that the current listing font is Lucida Sans Typewriter. But if I wanted to change it to, say, Courier New, I would click that there. I can open the help box again, and the font's changed. Additionally, the CJK font is used for fonts which require Japanese, Korean, or Chinese characters. Feel free to explore the other menu attributes options, such as plain and anti-alias text, different font sizes, and font scaling as well for buttons and widgets. Now I'm going to go a bit more in depth into some data visualization options available in D3Plot and T. I'll start with views. Views are used to save specific positions in windows from which to inspect your model. You can use the viewing tool to store, recall, and edit views. And views can be exported to other windows in D3Plot or even accessed from Primer. For an example of this, I'm going to go to D3Plot here. So you can see I've got a number of different windows open in a grid view. If I wanted to set this specific perspective of the model as a view, I would go to the Views tool, which you can either find down here, or you can use Viewing up here as well, and go to the View Manager. I want to store a new view by clicking this button here, and I haven't got any views currently stored for this model, but I'll choose the first slot, and I'll give it a name. So let's call it Front, Right, and Side. I click Done. So that view is now created for the model. That will save this view for window 1. I can also export a view without even saving it by using this drop-down menu here, and I can say export it, and that will send it to all the other windows that are open just in one click. So it could be particularly useful if you've got 4 very similar models and you want to look at them from the same angle to inspect slight differences in the data, maybe. And like I said, these views are stored in a file with your model, and those can be accessed from Primer as well. By default, these viewing files can store up to 100 views, so there's plenty of options for you there. Oh. Sorry about that, I've jumped too far ahead. This was the slide I wanted. Also in D3Plot, it's possible to group different entities within your model together, enabling certain actions to be performed on all of them at once. So this can be particularly helpful if the entities you want to manipulate are spread across a few different include files. So this is using the group tool, also known as the part group tool, and that's for THIS specifically. And I'll come on to why that's needed that distinction is needed in a second. Groups are stored in a .asc file, and that file is automatically read in when you open a model to recreate these groups, but you can change that setting. So I'll go to this D3PLOT window to make it a little bit easier. So the group tool is up here in the tools menu. I can click on that and create a group. So I want to add a few parts in, let's say this part and this part and this part. I can apply that. I can also add in some additional beams maybe, so they don't all have to be of the same type. And then I can store that group by clicking this button here. Similar to the view menu, it gives me an option of which slot to store it in, and I can name it and number it as well. I don't mind this one having its generic group 1 name though. If I want to read in a separate group file, I would go to this tab here and I can search my directories for a different .asc file. If I go to the part tree, I can manipulate groups from the part tree and from a number of the other tools as well. But first in the part tree, I need to show groups by clicking the type drop down here and turning them on. And now you can see groups will appear at the top of the part tree. I can only that group, I can only view that group by blanking everything else. Click on the group and click only here. And that just shows me the parts in that group. And in a model like this, where there are lots of different include files, it can be really, really helpful to access certain parts or something like that that are spread across different include files without having to search through the part tree. The .asc file that is created for these groups can be accessed in Primer, as I've said, and also in THIS. And that means that in THIS, you can plot data for a certain part group or something like that. As I've said, in THIS, they're referred to as part groups. This is an important distinction because THIS also has a groups tool, but that deals with curve groups. They're quite similar to part groups in that they are used to manipulate collections of curves. The data read in from one specific model is automatically grouped together by THIS, but you can also create your own, similar to creating a part group. So let's take a look at THIS now. So here I've got THIS session open and I've read in some data. If I go to the curve table, you can see at the bottom of the curve table, I've got each of my individual curves, and at the bottom it says model 1, and this is a group. So that's an automatic group that's been created by THIS. And that contains all of these curves because I've read them all in from the same model. If I were to read in a second model and draw some curves, that would be those curves would be grouped together as a second group automatically. I can also create some manual groups. Go to the groups tool here and create, and it shows me the curves I've currently read in. So I could group together two curves from two separate models that might be plotting similar data, and then I can manipulate them together rather than having to separate them, select them separately. So let's group these top 3 together. And there, curve group 2. I can open the curve table and then you can see curve group 2 is here. If I want to change their style, for instance, I can do that with this here. This was a right click on that row, and then I can click line style and I can change them all to use this close together dash. And then you should be able to see on the graph behind that those curves, which are not easy to see, let me blank a couple, I want to see there's the black one that was part of that group, and then this red one is also part of the group. So I'll blank the other red one. Should be able to see them both there with the same curve style. Also in the groups tool, I mentioned the automatic groups. You can control, whilst you can't manipulate what's in the group itself by taking things out and putting them in manually, you can change the settings on how groups are automatically created, and that's done from this menu here. So to repeat that, because I did it quite quickly, I go to groups, and it would take me to this menu, and then I'll click automatic, and it'll take me to this menu. So by default, it automatically creates groups based on the model ID, but I can also automatically create groups with entity types based on components or curve file index as well. The default contour options in D3plot are fairly standard across engineering fields, but they're not always the best suited for you, for your data, for your audience. So we offer some alternative color ramps that you can use, as they have a more accessible color palette and provide better distinction when printing in grayscale. Here's an example of two of them on your screen there. You can also manually create your own color palette if you want to demonstrate particular data. Let's take another look at D3plot. Unblank everything here. There we go. So if I want to plot some data, you can see the default rainbow contour ramp here. So let's plot some data. There we go. It's not that obvious there, everything's in one band because it's the beginning state of the model. But if I jump to say that state, you can see some different colors on show. Let's make this a bit more interesting. There we go. So this is the rainbow contour plot, and it's got different shades of pink here at one extreme, into red, orange, yellow, green, and then blue. And that's quite common. But it's not that easy to tell if you were printing this image, for instance, in grayscale. You might not be able to tell the difference between the red and the blue, as they have a similar lightness level. So when they're translated to gray values, they would look quite similar. For this particular contour plot, that's not too much of a problem. They're quite different parts of the model, and it's not going to be that common that people would misunderstand that. But there could be a case where they are closer together in proximity on the model, and that could become confusing. Additionally, quite a high percentage, a surprisingly high percentage of people live with red-green color blindness. I think it's something around 1 in 12 men and 1 in 200 women, and this is the most common form of color blindness. So the red and green here are actually a lot closer together in the bands, and green is showing like a mid-level, whereas red is closer to one extreme. You might need to distinguish that a little bit better on certain contour plots. So you can do that with a different color ramp. So here we've got Viridis, Plasma, Magma, and Inferno. Personally, I like the Viridis contour ramp. If I select that here, you can see the colors that it uses. If I refresh the window, there we go. So the yellow is at one extreme and the blue is at another extreme. This means that you avoid using colors that people commonly can't tell the difference between due to color blindness. It also means, because these colors change in lightness from the dark blue to the bright yellow, that scale translates a lot more cleanly into grayscale. But if you prefer, there are other contour ramps as well. Plasma, Magma, and Inferno. And you can see the Magma and Inferno ones both use a greater kind of change from almost black at one end to almost white at the other end. So it depends on what kind of data you're trying to distinguish between. If you need to easily distinguish between the extremes, then something like Magma or Inferno could be particularly useful. If you want to see more of the middle values, Viridis and Plasma can be quite useful. If you want to save these as your default rather than using the rainbow ones, you would use this Save Contour Colors button here, and that saves it to your preferences file, your OA pref file. As I also said, there are other things you can edit with the contours. So by default, it automatically calculates contour values per frame across all the frames, but you can also create it per frame. You can also define specific values in your contour if you want to look at those. So you might only be interested in data between 2 points. So you'd use the max and min. I might narrow this down a bit more. So rather than looking at minus 487, all of this stuff is, nothing's happening with the model at the moment. Let's look at something more interesting like that. There we go. So it now breaks down finer contour bands at this point of impact in the model here. Additionally, you can use the user-defined option to set up a band for a specific value if you want to always show, say, the 0 in a certain color, and you want to show everything above 0 and everything below 0. So I might put the 0 value. At the moment, it's right near the bottom of the contour. I could put it up here and have a few bands reserved for positive numbers and fewer bands reserved for negative numbers. There we go now. So you can see there's a lot less going on above 0 in this model. So it's probably not the most useful here. But if I was showing, say, stress, I can blank a few parts and we can look inside. Yeah. So similar to the contour bands anyway, you can control the colors and the appearance of your graphs with a number of different tools in THIS. The particular tools that you would want to know about here are the title and axes tools, which does what the name would suggest, allows you to manipulate the title and axes. The style tool, which I already demonstrated earlier in THIS, that controls curve styling, and the properties tool to display annotations. So, for example, we don't need to look at the curve groups anymore. We'll go to the title and axes tool. And I can change the font and color of the x-axis title by going to the x-axis tab here. You can see the color is here. At the moment it's set to be the default foreground because my graph background is white. We want it to be obvious in the foreground, but maybe I want it to be turquoise. It's probably not very reasonable, but it's changed there. I can also change the font. At the moment it's at a default, but there's a few different options here for your graph. Let's change it to Times Medium. Or Courier Bold. And you can save the preferences for these to your OA pref file. Additionally, each of these parts of the graph, each of those tabs can be accessed by right-clicking like this. So I can right-click and just access the y-axis options. One particular thing to note, some people find particularly useful, is on the legend. There's a few different options for layout. So it might be that you want to have a floating legend by clicking this tab here. That legend is then, you can move it to a different part of the graph if you want. So it overhangs slightly, and you can control everything from this tool here. The style and properties tools are also up here. There's the style button, and properties are next to it as well. But you can also edit these things from the curve table. So we already looked at the curve table once to talk about groups. And the styling, as I said, you can change that here. Line style, line width, color, etc. Also, curve properties can be edited from this tab here. It gives you a few different options. And you can, from this, you can add annotations to your curves, which could be particularly useful. So I might add the maximum Y value to be annotated on this curve 1 by, I can go into the pop-up and tick this annotations box. You see it highlights it now in a kind of cyan color. And the options for annotation can be edited in here as well. You can format it, you can change whether it displays the numerical value, whether it highlights it, whether it adds a label. And there's my annotation present there. But it is overlapping slightly with my curve, so maybe I want to change the options. I can turn the value off. I can not display it. I can just highlight where it is on the curve, or I should be able to move it as well. Finally, you probably saw the color pop-up that's visible here on your screen in a couple of those examples there. But as well as the 30 colors in our standard palette, there's space for up to 150 user-defined colors. User-defined colors are saved in an XML file in your home directory by default. And this XML file can be specified with a preference if you don't want to use the default one in your home directory. So the preference that you use is called user_color_file, but you can find out more information about that by going to the manuals. I'll show you how to create a color first of all. So I'll go back to THIS. And this is the 30 predefined colors, and then this is the space for user-defined colors. So I've already defined one color for myself here. To define a new one, I would click on one of these plus buttons, and it gives me this menu here. So there are a number of different methods you can use to create a new color using this menu. At the top we have red, green, and blue sliders, or text box associated with them as well if you just want to type in a value. So I can drag to mix a certain amount of red, maybe a lot of green, only a little bit of blue, and that creates a color for me here on the right hand side. Or I can change the value by typing directly into this box. Maybe I want it to only be 100 blue. And these values must range between 0 and 255. Moving down the panel, you can type in a hexadecimal number into this box, which represents a specific color. So if I want a specific shade of orange, I'll use D6830A, hit enter, and it's created it for me. The color wheel at the bottom here and the triangle relate to the hue, saturation, and lightness sliders. Again, similar with the red, green, and blue sliders. You can use the sliders or you can move things around on these wheels. So if I might want to move this around here, you can see that the lightness stays the same, but the color is changing through different values in the wheel. And I can manipulate on here to change the saturation and lightness. That's quite similar to the first color I've got. So maybe I'll move it back round to an orange. And then I would click apply to create it. So that's then added to my session. If I wanted to save this color though, to use in future sessions, I would need to remember to press this Save Colors button at the top here. Again, as with the preferences earlier, it says, of course, I've got access to the install directory. I'm just going to save it to my home directory though. If I launch a new session of D3Plot, you should be able to see that color that I've just created now appear. So here's one of the color pop-ups, and there's that color I've just created. And you can edit it, you can change the name of it, or you can just delete it from here as well. If you're using a linked TAS session, there's no need to open a new session to use a color that you've created in, say, TAS and D3 or D3Plot in the other one. So if I wanted to plot a part in a contour, show a part in a particular color on my model, I can also show the curve in that same color. So I could go to the curve style, and I can create a new color here. Let's put a lot of red in. There's a nice dark red. It's a bit different from the default colors. Oops. Click apply. And then that color, if I then go to D3Plot, is accessible in here as well. For more details about user-defined colors, you can head again to the TAS and D3Plot manuals, and there's a lot more information about that there. I'm just going to have a quick look through any questions now. I can see one, can I add multiple script directories to my preferences? Off the top of my head, I've not tried to do that, but we may see them if I look for, what was the preference called again? I'm going to jump back to that slide. So script directory, I believe it's only looking for one script, but I will double check for you and we can get back to you on that. If there are any further questions, then you're welcome to get in touch with your local support team, and we'll hopefully be able to do our best to answer those for you. I thank you for watching this webinar then. Our next webinar is due to take place on the 7th of May, and you can register by following the link that's on your screen right now. Information about our forthcoming courses and webinars can be found on our website, which I'm sure you're all aware of, but I'll repeat it for those who aren't. It's www.oasys-software.com/DYNA. You can also sign up to our newsletter on our website to find out about our latest news, plus other training and support information. Thank you once again for listening today and for watching. If there are any further questions or queries, please feel free to email your local distributor or use the contact details that are on your screen now.